No!
Today we're talking about I Know What You Did Last Summer. Yes, I haven't seen this. The title just sounds so incredibly memeable, especially after all these years since its release. It had a name in revitalizing the slasher genre in the 90s. I've heard of and even have seen the movie growing up because it has been memed and parodied to shit. The first Scary Movie being the forerunner of that. It had an incredible theatrical run. The budget was only about 17 million but made 125 million in return. According to Statista.com, it is ranked the 7th highest grossing slasher film in North America as of October 2019. So pretty much the same timeline as right now. And it was followed up with 2 sequels with terribly uninspired titles. So I think it's safe to say The Thing was pretty big. Is the film any good and has it aged well? I would argue not so much. It is so blatantly 90s that once it steps out of the early 2000s, it simply does not work as well anymore. So there is an age gap to this thing. I Know What You Did Last Summer follows 4 high school graduates who covered up a car accident in which they crashed into a man. A year later, some dude with a hook thingy starts sending them threatening letters, playing psychological games with them, and of course, killing them with the hook thingy. I know me sitting here saying how every character in the film is very disposable isn't gonna surprise anyone because that's what it's like for many of these slasher films anyway. In this particular film, the characters simply exist. It doesn't feel like they've been existing in this world long before the movie. I never feel they have lives that they live once we cut away to another scene. They just simply exist when we have them on screen. As a matter of fact, there's one scene where a character says, "We used to be best friends," and my reaction to that was, really? How come we never really feel that? The film presents these 4 high schoolers, right, as just that. They're just a bunch of kids hanging out, drinking alcohol, and that's it. That's the impression I got. So if you try to strike me with a lightning of emotion later on, it wouldn't work at all. But all that can be easily forgivable if the filmmakers can present a case in which they show that they have good instinct to the audience, let that be the directing, cinematography, the score, or really anything. Unfortunately, I Know What You Did Last Summer didn't quite show any of those, so it was just kind of left pretty ordinary. Now, before you think I'm gonna demolish this movie in this video, I just want to say that I think this movie is completely fine. It is a completely watchable movie, one that I had fun watching, kicking back. It does the job at entertainment, and I'm not offended by it, not to the slightest. I don't have anything major against this movie, and I don't think it's terrible. So when it comes to the directing, even though it is competently helmed, I still don't think enough people talk about how directors communicate with actors. In most cases, it's probably pretty hard to tell if the director is making the performance choices or the actors are. In this movie, I have a feeling that the cast do have some potential and ability to deliver what's written on the page, but the director probably didn't give them enough to work with. So a lot of the scenes just come off so awkward. This can only extend to the writing, where the dialogues are so hard to deliver in a natural and believable way. The audience just naturally blame the performers. Although I'm just guessing here that this lies more on the directing and writing, there are a lot of scenes of essentially the same thing where the characters come together and debate on how they shouldn't tell anybody about this hook thingy stalker has been screwing with them, but also they should because they're scared. When it comes to the cinematography, there's not an issue here, but if you decide to open the thing with the best shot of your entire movie, that's just not a good idea of setting up the pedestal. The score was fine, but the soundtrack is pretty terrible, especially how they used it throughout. We get a very serious scene of something happening, and then we cut straight to another scene where this hyper music is playing, like somehow they're not acknowledging some really messed up things happening in the story. The casting overall, while I find fitting, Johnny Galecki and his character stuck out like a sore thumb. For once, I think he is woefully miscast. As much as I enjoy his screen presence sometimes, it's just a very off casting choice, and his character also did not help at all. His character is so pointless. There's a setup for him, but the setup is completely aimless. If you watched it, you understand what I'm talking about. Overall, as a slasher film, it does carry out the trope of having extremely disposable characters die for no reason at all. For most of the runtime, our main group of protagonists are just worrying about something that didn't even establish his presence. The villain is more of an idea than an actual villain, which, by the way, after the ending, you start to question his motive for everything he has done. Maybe some scenes and plot points don't make any sense anymore. This movie thinks it is a lot more epic and big than it actually is. I just think it lacks some self-awareness, which would make this movie a pretty fun ride, I think. But we end up with a movie that's pretty self-indulgent. It still contains false jump scares, which I call it the shoulder scare. It's really not necessary and pretty tasteless by this point. Again, I emphasize, I am perfectly fine with this movie being a piece of entertainment. You can easily watch with your friends. It's a perfectly fine movie. I don't hate this movie at all. I'm gonna give I Know What You Did Last Summer a C.